So each book will be reviewed in a minute, and I'll set some sort of timer, and the timer will go off, and you're welcome to finish the thought that you're in the middle of. You know, we're not going to make you shut up the minute it goes off. So just finish the thought, and then we'll move on. And it's kind of a guitar strumming sound, but you'll get the idea. Okay. And then one thing to keep in mind for the people sitting out here is if you haven't been a rapid reviewer yet and you think it looks like fun, let me know and I can put you on the list for next semester and we can work that out. And another thing I'd like to start out with is just to let all the reviewers have a minute to just talk about if there's anything they noticed while they were putting together their list or something that ties them together or just sort of how you came up with the list. So you can do that if you want and you don't have to. So Carol, is there any sort of thing that...
Yeah, I have lots of favorite books, so I made categories, and I have a selection from works by anthropologists, artist books and related works, audiobooks, film video, making things, remnants of my past in math, which actually didn't end up in a book, and then plans. So things that you could find in the library that I really love. Representatives.
And I didn't do my favorite books.
Okay.
I decided to just go with what I've been reading since December. And it was actually kind of interesting because then I was looking, it's eclectic, and I thought, well, what are the themes? And I think the theme you'll probably see, but it has to do with journeys, crossing boundaries, going into other worlds.
Cool. Rico, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, books I picked, I just generally chose things that were significant to me, that books that I really loved personally on a deep level. And then from there, I had to end up cutting my list down. So I tried to choose books I thought were more unique and original that wouldn't be picked or talked about or wouldn't be as common.
Cool. What do you, Kyhl?
With a couple of exceptions, I tried to choose books that really influenced my life in non-academic ways. Books that I keep coming back to as touchstones, but not necessarily bring onto campus all that regularly. So I guess you'll see what I mean as we go through.
I'll be Justin.
Well, I've been on a massive crime fiction kick for the past year or so. Got started with a little book called Savages by Don Winslow. It isn't your day, but one of his books is. And expanded it to include books with language or uses of language and stuff with me, which more often than not turned out to be crime fiction. So read that if you will.
Sarah.
I just picked the books that left a big impression on me that I could think of. So some of the books I read a long time ago and other books are more recent. So it's just a big mix of books. Yeah.
Yay. And you're already all very succinct. So we're just going to start at the top of this list and work our way down. So, Catherine's first.
So on the top of the list, this book is called Proof of Heaven. Do not be put off by the title. It's Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife. Evan Alexander wrote it, and it was an impulse take off a shelf in the library next door to my house. And what it is a story of a near-death experience that Evan Alexander has. What's interesting about it is he's a neurosurgeon. So he does a whole analysis in the end about the medical process that he was going through while he was having this experience. What's also typical of it is it's very hard to express a near-death experience. It's an ineffable experience that he has, and so he grasps the different metaphors that are appealing to him to talk about what he goes through, which may not be resonant, for example, with me, which I didn't. It's also a family story about his whole family around the deathbed. He doesn't die, he comes back. And I would recommend it. It gets a little bit preachy in the end there, which I didn't enjoy, but other than that, it's good.
Oh, I'm not. Alright, Mary Austin, The Land of Little Rain. This is a really fun edition because it has photographs by Ansel Adams as a bonus. Land of Little Rain is a regional, I guess it's nonfiction. I think regional writers are great, so I wanted to pick a regional writer. So these are writers who write about kind of local color and specific landscapes. And Land of Little Rain is the east side of the Sierras in California and Nevada, which I think is just a wonderful place to spend time. My own copy is completely shredded from being brought on camping trips to this area. So sand and wind and sun are not book friendly.
This is Sharp Teeth. It's a novel written by Toby Barlow, but what's really interesting about it is it's written entirely in free verse. So it's entirely written in poetry, which is really beautiful. And if you ever want something really alternative or different, and also a really good story, this is pretty interesting. It's contemporary adult fiction, so it's generally for like an older audience. And the reason why it has the dog on the cover is because it's about a gang of lycanthropes, which are like human beings that are kind of like half dog, half werewolves, in a post-apocalyptic future in Los Angeles. And it's also a love story. So, and this is Black Athena. This is a book by Martin Bernal, who was a Jewish professor of ancient Chinese history at Cornell University. And he wrote this book in 3 volumes. And basically, he argues that largely, like, Greek culture was derived from ancient Semitic and Egyptian influences, and Afro-Asiatic influences, and that the reason why in contemporary academia we don't recognize that now as part of classicism is because there was a paradigm of racism that grew in parallel to academia at the time that research on Greek history was being done. And part of that racist influence decided that Semitic influences and Black influences would be tarnish the Greek and the pure Aryan heritage that they wanted to associate Greek culture with.
One more.
got one more.
Oh, so you get Alright. This is the TAZ, the Temporary Autonomous Zone. If you have ever heard of Burning Man, that event that happens in Nevada, this is kind of where they got the idea from. This was written by this man named Hakeem Bey, who's like a white Muslim. He's like a white Muslim political activist and theorist, and so this is a collection of political essays where he develops his theory of a temporary autonomous zone, which is basically what Burning Man is. And basically he argues that to escape structures of oppression that are ingrained in societies, we have to be focused on the immediate moment. So instead of like trying to develop a society based on like what are going to be the concerns in the future, which automatically set up power dynamics and structures of oppression, we only focus on being creative and attentive to the immediate moment. And as long as you do that, you don't have to worry about setting up systems of power dynamics that are unequal.
Alright, my next book is called Landscape with Two Saints, How Genevieve of Paris and Bridget of Kildare Built Christianity in Barbarian Europe by Lisa Bittell. Lisa Bittell is a scholar of early medieval Ireland and has written specifically on women in early medieval Ireland, and I love her, read a lot of her. And I was in Northampton for dinner, found this in a bookstore, and was all excited and bought it. So, I've been reading it, but I've only read the parts about Bridget of Kildare. I haven't read about Genevieve yet. And what she argues is that, well, she explores the nexus between landscape, gender, and architecture. And what she argues is that Bridget, Saint Bridget of Kildare, was probably the goddess Bridget originally in Ireland, and that when she, the saint, was Christianizing Ireland, she did it by looking at the patterns of sacred landscape use and using those and, kind of reinfusing them with a Christian overlay. It's a very well-written book and really exciting. Oh, next again. Oh, okay. Dantes Inferno. One thing that can be counted on me is if you read a book and you're a friend of mine, I'll read it. Or I'll buy it too. And this guy, David Blistein, lives in Dummerston, where I live. And he just came out with this book. It's called David's Inferno, My Journey Through the Dark Wood of Depression. And he had a reading in Putney earlier this year. And it's very hard to write about depression. And he does a wonderful job writing about depression, his own experience, his family's experience of it, and then he also plays with the Divine Comedy as kind of the metaphor of how he puts this book together. And I've read a lot of books about depression. My favorite is Darkness Visible by William Styron. This one, I would say, is also very good in the sense that it gives you a palpable sense of what the person is suffering. So,
All right. My first book is Roberto Bolaño's Last Evenings on Earth, edition translated by Chris Andrews. Bolaño was a Chilean poet who realized that poetry would not feed him, so he moved over to prose fiction, but never really got over his love affair with poetry. The result was a really, really eloquent writer who was interested in everything from disappeared poets to the apocalypse to a really, really disturbing series of unsolved murders in Mexico. Last Evening on Earth is a collection of short stories, my favorite of which is probably Phone Calls, which is a murder mystery and love story where the characters are only ever referred to by one letter. And he sells it completely, which is impressive when you take a gimmick that could easily overwhelm the story. And that's the case with most of his writing.
Sorry, what am I doing? I'm sorry, guys. Oh, quiet. All right. So, this was another at my library next door. This was on the shelf, so I grabbed it. And it's called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And I actually do love this book. This book, basically she's working with the Myers-Briggs extroversion introversion scale or type. And says that the dominant way that we're acting is the extroverted way, and that we're all talking all the time, and that's where the power is, and that's where things happen. And what she does is talk about how the quiet people or the introverted people actually do have significant power in how they communicate, influence, and make things happen. She starts this from her own experience because she's kind of a high-powered, I think she's a lawyer, she's a very high-powered position, but she is an introvert. And she has chapters in here, one chapter I particularly liked, which was about children, raising quiet children, if your children, because I have a quiet child. And I also really enjoyed this book because of Marlboro, because Marlboro is so chat, talk, and wow, he's so quiet, is always kind of a comment like there's a lack. And she says there's no lack.
So my first book is Childhood's End by Augusty Clarke, which is one of the stories in this volume. And so when I first read it, the copy that I had has like a really cool cover that's like a futuristic city, and that's why I chose to read it because I liked it. Anyway, so but what it's about is like a near future where the world is overtaken by these aliens called the Overlords, and they fix all the world's problems, like all the crime and poverty and everything. But then it turns out that they have like this secret agenda, and like, I won't give it away, but it's really exciting.
All right. Well, time since the next trilogy.
So you have to get a minute for each one.
Really.
Yeah. If you want it.
These are the Darwin Cook comic adaptations of Richard Stark's Parker novels. Darwin Cook was an animator who made his name on the highly acclaimed Batman animated series before leaving to pursue comic illustration and writing full time. He made his name as a comic author with something called The New Frontier, which was DC characters during the civil rights movements in the 60s. And moved on to Parker because he'd always loved the crime fiction of Donald Westlake, who wrote of Richard Stark. Ren Westlake's definitive character was a brutal, vicious, and thoroughly professional thief named Parker, who doesn't really have a lot of character, and that's what makes him fascinating. He is so completely committed to doing the job and doing the job well, or when the job doesn't go well, figuring out why it didn't go well and making those responsible pay, that there isn't a lot else to him, and he just remains completely driven. He's terrifying and fascinating at the same time. It says something that in his introduction in the first of these, of Hunter, we don't see his face for the first several pages until at last it's revealed. And this is his expression. Yeah. Right. He is a man completely driven by his desire for, in this case, vengeance. Which makes the first of these, The Hunter, well, a well-told revenge story. Parker's been screwed over. He doesn't care for that, and he sets out making everyone involved pay. Horribly. But for my money, the best of his adaptation so far is the outfit, wherein the Mafia decides, we'll get revenge on the guy who demonstrated that targeting him is a really, really stupid idea, regardless of the consequences. And Parker writes all his friends and says, get the mob. So they get the mob. He lets Cook play around with his skills as a cartoonist. There's a really, really excellent section that takes about a quarter of the book, detailing the assorted hits Parker's independent thieves pull off against the mob. And they range in style from a story written in a sleazy crime magazine to one of those how-to guides that you get with an old piece of refrigerator equipment in the 60s, to an incredibly stylized follow the arrow path through a raid on a mob bank. It's really interesting use of space and time and line. And then finally, there is the most recent of them, the score, which isn't connected to Beyond featuring Parker, as he attempts to rob an entire town. They are fantastic, and I highly recommend them.
So, my next book is 50 Poems by E.E. Cummings. This is a book that I read a while ago, but I really like, it's a good example of E.E. Cummings' work, which, if you're not familiar with it, he really uses words in a very interesting way. Like, the sentences he has aren't, complete sentences, or the style he writes his poems in isn't really a very conventional way, but it really expresses the emotions that he's trying to convey really well, I think. And this is just one of the first poetry books that really moved me in a very inspiring way. Oh. Okay, so his next book. The next book is the last book of Norse Myths. So I read this in school in 5th grade, and I just really, really liked it. I really like the stories which are told in a very like easy to get way, and also the illustrations are really great. Like we got these like really great color pencil drawings of the different Norse gods and giants, and also just the nature of the stories. It's just there's a lot of excitement going on, and the gods are always like there's always something up in heaven, and it's I mean the Norse myths differ in others and other cultures' myths in that the gods are like they really have a vengeance for each other, and there's a lot of bloodshed.
So, perhaps not surprisingly, I like to read anthropology, and I decided what is an ethnography, a study of a particular place in the world that I really like and want to put forward in this rapid review. So I chose Lauren Danforth's Fire Walking and Religious Healing as a real favorite of mine, and some of my students here know I'm often pushing them, hey, have you looked at this book? He combines wonderful descriptive writing of being in a community in northern Greece, a community where you can become possessed and walk on coals as part of religious healing. He also blends it wonderfully with theory and kind of swings back and forth in how he treats the different subjects and informs them theoretically after you've sort of been grabbed by the descriptive part. He also includes his own sort of positions, like what he might have dreamt one night, or he has a section, The Anthropologist Who Doesn't Believe.
No. Oh, it's me. Okay, my next book is called The 15-Minute Mermaid, and this is by Lyndgaard, who is actually, she's one of my favorite poets, and I discovered her probably 20 years ago. I found her first book, Astragon Cloak, in the kind of a basement of Kyhl Abbey in Ireland, and I took it and I loved it. And so I've been following her ever since. She is from the Dingle Peninsula, from the Gaeltacht, and she writes in Irish. So all of her work comes out in dual language editions, and Paul Muldoon, the Irish poet himself, is her main translator. And what is interesting about Lyndgaard is she uses local folklore stories and Irish mythology, Christian symbolism, and feminism. And she does an amazing play with this. This book I ordered this year because I hadn't read it, and it's called 15-Minute Mermaid. And in this one, she's doing something a little different. She's creating a whole mythology of the mer people and merfolk. Oh. Okay. I'm going to read a poem. Oh,
This book is called The Lover by Marguerite Duras. Probably the most beautiful book I've ever read in my life by miles. Not even close. I read this book in high school. It's about this French girl. Well, it's actually semi-autobiographical, so it's actually kind of about Marguerite Duras' own life. They also made a movie out of this. And basically, it talks about her relationship with this Asian man that she falls in love with, in like Franco-occupied Vietnam. And basically, the struggle she goes through because her family doesn't want her to be with him. So she's basically having like a secret relationship with him throughout the novel. And what's really interesting about the book is that it's not linear. It kind of like reflects her memory, and so it jumps around periodically. So not only is the prose beautifully written, but the structure of the novel is really interesting and complex. You should check it out.
Well, that's exciting. Mine falls on complex writing as well. This is Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Green Squad, which I picked up on a whim because the paperback edition's a winner of the Pulitzer Prize, and that usually means something. It starts out as the story of of music in the 20th century, and as is sort of music in the 21st century, it spans decades, each chapter being narrated by a character who appeared in the previous chapter, be they that previous chapter's narrator's best friend or someone who appeared across the street for 5 seconds without a name. And despite the huge range of narrators, there's a consistent story to be told here about the advancement of humanity and how information technology shapes the way we interact with each other. Towards the end, there's a chapter told in the form of PowerPoint. And it's enthralling. The ending's a bit of a letdown, but considering how strong the rest of the book is, that doesn't bother me too much.
So, given that I tend to grab anthropology over nonfiction, a question I had is how am I going to get fiction in my life? And my answer is audiobooks. Audiobooks, especially, I love reading them as I drive. So I thought, what is one of my favorite audiobooks? Middlesex. This version of Middlesex, the story about Kyhl, who becomes in his teenage years, Calliope, who becomes Kyhl in his teenage years, and the 3 generations of Screwtape's family is wonderfully presented by, and I can't even, the narrator doesn't even get the credit here, but the person who reads it is just fabulous, and you're there with these incredible adventures of Calliope / Kyhl and all of her family members and neighbors, and it's wonderful. We have other great ones in the library too.
This is Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. I read this book this semester, and it was probably my favorite book I read this semester on my own. Pretty impactful. Basically, he argues from this Marxist perspective that people, the proletariat, or the people that are being oppressed by the bourgeoisie, lack the capacity to recognize their social position and the structures of oppression that they are under. And so through a pedagogy, which is an educational philosophy that he develops throughout this book, he argues that you can do a form of conscious raising, where you get people to develop a critical consciousness where they recognize their position in the world and then are able to change their predicament. Because he argues that their predicament as being oppressed is of a passive object, which means they have no capacity to change their situation or transform the world. And through educating them and changing their consciousness, they recognize that they can be an active subject and therefore transform the world and contribute to the changing of the universe of beings.
Well, continuing with my kick on books that do strange things with text, this is Stephen Hall's The Raw Shark Tests. A man wakes up in his house with no memory of who he is, and the only clues are a series of packages he left himself, which eventually reveal that he's being hunted by a shark that lives in human thought and preys on it. If the shark gets him, it'll wipe out his identity again and probably kill him. So he sets out trying to find a way to hunt this creature that shouldn't technically exist at all. And in the process, some crossing ancient conspiracy involving the perpetuation of one very angry old man from the 1800s across several hundred years. It's a bit of a thriller. And it's exciting enough that when I picked it up, because the title looked interesting in the library in high school, I read it all the way through and picked it up again years later and found it just as good. It also does interesting things with text art from the shark itself appears. It's not probably pretentious.
I'm actually going to do this next, the Donna Haraway one, because her name only has one R, so she'd come before Catherine Common. And I'm just pointing you to some wonderful books that we have in the library. This one, Donna Haraway, you might know, is a culture critic who teaches at the History of Consciousness program in Santa Cruz. She's a really heavy-duty writer. It's like swimming through the oatmeal sometimes to get through her work. This Paper Tiger Video is a public broadcasting group in, I think, New York. I would say it's a combination of heavy-duty lecture crossed with Pee-wee's Playhouse. It is amazing. Things are happening. Cyborgs are walking across the screen. You have National Geographic images of primates. Jane Goodall is there. It is surreal. She is surreal. I'll launch right into this one. The next one, when you get tired of reading words, it's always great to pick up a book with pictures. And this one is a favorite of mine called You Are Here, not to be confused with I Live Here, which is another great book. So this one is exploring and considering, what is the subtitle, personal geographies and other maps of the imagination. Catherine Harmon, who has another book called The Map is Art, looks at a number of different kinds of mapping possibilities by people from various walks of life and careers, and fantasy worlds, old maps, new maps, personal geographies. It's a treat.
So, my next book is A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. So this book is kind of famous, or infamous maybe, for being a bestseller, but not really read. But even though it's about like astrophysics and stuff like that, it's not that hard to understand. In fact, there's only one equation in it, which is E = mc squared. And just the way that it's written and the way it's laid out is easy to understand. It kind of goes through the history of our concepts of the universe, as well as through the history of the universe itself, looking at from how it began to how it might end. And it's just a really cool way to understand those really hard to understand concepts of space. So my next book is Tintin in Tibet, which is part of the Adventures of Tintin, which you can see the covers of on the back. There's a whole bunch of them. And this one's my favorite, partly because it was the first one that I read, so it was what got me interested in Tintin, but also because of the story. It's probably one of the most engaging. So it follows continuing stories of Tintin, who's a boy reporter in the early 20th century, who travels around the world and things happen to him and there's bad guys. And in this one, there's a particularly menacing bad guy. And also, he has to help save his friend who is lost, and it's very exciting.
All right. This is George V. Higgins' Kogan's Trade, published now as Killing Them Softly in anticipation of the Andrew Dominic film adaptation, which is well worth seeing on its own. Admittedly, I have not had a chance to finish this because my dad ran off with my copy before I could get into it. But what I have read is simple, elegant writing detailing a crime that the perpetrators thought no one would get blamed for. They knock over a mob card game that was knocked over by its owner, and they won't like the owner, so they forgave him. But if he ever does it again, well, he must suffer. Unfortunately, they're idiots. So the mob calls in and forces to try to figure out what happened and why, and the rest of the novel follows his efforts to make sure the consequences come. Beyond that, it's good enough that I want to keep reading it even though I didn't get a chance to finish it. Thanks, Dad.
So back to anthropology, and I'm going to here with you in a second. Lauren Danforth, who wrote this book, teaches in Maine and also did firewalking in the American firewalking movement in Maine, so lines crossed, which brings us to the next book, which didn't come back to the library, but here's the cover. Timothy Ingold's Lines of Brief History, which is this wonderful sort of theoretical but illustrated consideration of lines in our life, lines of music, lines of moving, calligraphy, travel, walking. He has one discussion about wayfaring versus destination travel. Destination travel, I'm going over there, versus wayfaring, wherever life takes me. And he has wonderful insights about, again, handwriting, calligraphy versus typewriting, drawing, sketching, as opposed to using rulers or computers. So it's a wonderful, creative, insightful book. Stretch your mind.
So my next book is Austerity, Britain, by David Kyhl. And this book is a social history of Britain during the Attlee government of 1945 and 1951, which was a very interesting time in Britain's history, mostly because it's about the austerity that Britain went through. And this book is really fascinating because instead of just listing what happened and dates and stuff like that, it looks at the people. And so it's full of like vox populi and interviews done at that time and also later. And it's also got a lot of great photos of the times that really help you soak in what it must have been like living in Britain at that during those 6 years.
Okay, so I don't actually have anything against Screwtape, but Ursula Le Guin's Always Coming Home. This is a book I'd like to tell people about. I don't know if some of you may know it. I just think it's a fascinating creation. Ursula Le Guin is the daughter of anthropologist Theodore Kroeber, and she's best known for kind of futuristic sci-fi. Well, this is actually futuristic sci-fi, but it's set in Northern California in a time in the future when everything's collapsed and people are living very primitive lives. And she enlisted a composer. There's actually a CD with the first edition of this, an artist and a geomancer. So there's lots of, she basically creates an anthropology of this future culture called the Kesh. And there's also about 100-page novella that kind of every third chapter.
So my next book is The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. And C.S. Lewis is mostly known for his Chronicles of Narnia, but this book is very different in that it's much darker in tone. It's written as a series of letters from a senior demon to a lower demon in hell. Basically, the senior demon's teaching the lower demon how to demonize this man who's referred to as the patient. They're trying to secure his damnation in hell, and it's just a very interesting look into both what is good and what is bad, and also into ourselves, is what do we decide to do versus what is forced upon us by outside things. And it's just a very interesting book. My next book is Magic for Beginners by Kelly Link. And this is a series of short stories, kind of written in like a magical realism type of style, with a lot of kind of like, I guess, light horror maybe thrown in. So it's like some of the stories are more linear than others, and it just a lot of strange things happen in them. and it's really interesting. And it's just like you never know where the story is going to turn out. And you're never really sure where the story came from in the first place. It's like, it's really good. Really great book.
This is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read it the summer before my sophomore year at Marlboro, just for fun, because I was interested in magical realism. I think this book is really cool. It deals with themes like the circular nature of time and the world, the nature of reality, and family. Yeah.
I picked Kyhl Marston's plan not to sort of put hers before all, but to basically say all of you should spend more time in the plan room. Because plans are great. I could have picked any one of 100, including some that people in this room have written. And so Kyhl happened to have used a book structure for hers, and you'll see why this is important to me later, writing about pregnancy and childbirth in Nepal. But you should really just go to the plan room, look up an area, and sit down with some of the student work. It's marvelous, and I don't think we spend enough time with it. So this is my advertisement to go read plans.
Blood meridians.
Oh yeah.
Oh, but please review it anyway. That'd be awesome. Sorry.
I was supposed to be reviewing Blood Meridians by Cormac McCarthy, but we don't have the book because someone took it. Blood Meridian follows the main character. Blood Meridian follows the kid. He doesn't actually have a name. He's just called the kid throughout the book. And basically, he gets involved with the Glanton gang, and it takes place, I don't know, it's like in the West, and the Glanton gang is basically a gang that's hired to like skin people's heads. Sorry about that. But basically, the kid joins the Glanton gang, and he meets this guy named the Judge, who's kind of like the leader of the Glanton gang. Basically, it's his experience with the gang in the West. And Cormac McCarthy has an incredibly powerful writing style. If you've ever read anything else by him, I think Blood Meridian is like an incredibly powerful and strong novel. So I suggest you guys read it.
I couldn't bump Cormac McCarthy, but he's a little too scary. Okay, so Born to Run, a hidden tribe, super athletes, and the greatest race the world has never seen. Christopher McDougall. And I picked this one up in an airport, actually, because I am a runner, used to be more of a runner, and briefly I was not much of a runner, but this book got me back into it. And McDougall is the guy who kind of popularized this idea of minimalist barefoot running, and he went to Mexico to run with the Tarahumara Indians and put on a race there. I'm not a barefoot runner, but this book made me think maybe I could be. So that was a hard sell. But it's just an exciting kind of adventure story, and really detective story as he's trying to put all these pieces together about who these runners are and why they're able to do these incredible feats.
These are the essays by Montaigne. Montaigne was a writer from the 16th century. Most people would say that he developed the essay. You could say that, I guess. Basically, one thing about Montaigne is he has an incredible style weaving in like quotations into his prose, which is really, really impressive. Because I think often when you introduce a quote, it might interrupt the flow of the paper, but this guy is almost like perfect at at being able to do that, which is really, really cool. And it's really, really nice to read. One essay in here that I particularly like was of education, which basically he talks about his theory of education. Jody in the back, like, and that essay is really cool because basically he talks about how, like, generally we think of education as only having to do with academics and intellectual things, whereas he kind of argues that you have to raise a person as an entire human being, and it's not just intellectual capacities, but you have to cultivate their moral, ethical, spiritual, and even physical well-being so that they can fulfill their full potential.
Okay, shifting gears, The Glorious Flight, Across the Channel with Louis Bellerio, by Alice and Martin.
Sarah?
Yeah, the great boy.
No problem.
So my book is Grapefruit by Yoko Ono. So this book is a book of instructions and drawings. So what Yoko was doing was like a bunch of what she called instruction paintings, where she would write a simple instruction for a painting to create inside your head. For example, here's painting to exist only when it's copied or photographed. Let people copy or photograph your paintings. Destroy the originals. Or the one on the back is tuna fish sandwich piece, which is imagine 1,000 suns in the sky at the same time. Let them shine for 1 hour. Then let them gradually melt into the sky. Make one tuna fish sandwich and eat. And so it's a mixture of like conceptual kind of meditation and also humor. And it's a really good introduction to Yoko Ono's art.
Okay, so this is a children's book. I think it's fun to read because there's a lot of sentence variety. There's lots of very short sentences and lots of very long sentences, not much in between. Pictures are kind of fun. There's lots of names. It's a historical story of the first person to fly across the English Channel. But I chose this one because I've been reading a lot of children's stories lately with a 1-year-old. And this is the first one I realized I had memorized. I realized that at night when the light had kind of failed, and I just started reading it without being able to see the words. It was a very cool experience.
Well, when you get tired of reading academic books, you go to desserts. And so with spring comes the thoughts of fruits coming out, and this book called Rustic Fruit Desserts is organized seasonally, so you can start with spring fruits and move on through the seasons using plums, blueberries, boysenberry, raspberry, peach. You can make fools, you can make cobblers, you can make crumbles, you can make tarts. Eat fruit. Wonderful book. Very inspirational. I'm not a cook, and it's propelled me into new dessert directions.
This is a guide for the perplexed. It's a short little book. You can read it in like a day. It's by E.F. Schumacher, who wrote this book called Small is Beautiful. And basically this is the philosophical underpinnings of Small is Beautiful. And basically what he talks about in this book is, he argues that basically when we adopted our Cartesian paradigm, after we adopted Descartes' philosophy and built our scientific paradigms around that, there are certain aspects of knowledge that we denied, that pre-moderns did believe in, such as like self-knowledge. He also says that like now, since we live in a post-Cartesian paradigm, we tend to focus in on knowledge as something that is only measurable. We only find things that we can measure out or we can calculate. Whereas he says there's other modes of knowledge, and he provides an epistemological theory where he gives different degrees for different types of knowledge and different ways of getting access to those types of knowledge.
Alright, this is Canoeing with the Cree by Eric Severu. And this is the story of two high school graduates who in 1930 paddled from Fort Snelling in St. Paul, Minnesota to the Hudson Bay, which is over 2,000 miles. And this book is based on newspaper stories that they were sending back. They'd find a place that had a typewriter, like a farmhouse that happened to have a typewriter, and type up their story, send it back for publication. And it's actually very well written. Eric Severu went on to a very great career as a commentator in CBS Evening News. And it gave me the bad idea when I was quite young that these things are feasible and lots of people can do this, and why not? And so my parents spent much of my childhood trying to keep me from doing stuff like this. Only slightly successful. Okay. This is a more recent purchase, The Sibley Guide to Birds. And this is maybe the book I'm alluding to the most at the beginning of the Rapid Reviews, because this is one I pull down almost every day off my shelf as I look out my windows and try to figure out what's flying around. I have a whole shelf of field guides. I picked this one maybe because it's the most beautiful book, and I like just showing it off. And each one of these is a painting that David Sibley painted. And I just think it's an impressive piece. He also has a guide to trees. So I just think this is an essential thing for people's bookshelves, especially if you can't get internet.
When I first started teaching at Marlboro, I would go home and I just needed to do something else other than read a book or talk about a book or look in papers. And so I took up knitting with a vengeance. And this is a book that was just a favorite of mine, Alice Starmore's Book of Fair Isle Knitting. If you can knit with one thread of yarn, fine. It's pretty easy to take up two. And once you've taken up two, it's pretty easy to get pretty complex fast. And so, whoops, I'm not finding, she has these beautiful, inspired combinations of designs and colors, asks you to look outside and take in the spring colors, fall colors, whatever, and pick up your pair of needles, a couple of balls of yarn, and knit yourself a scarf or a sweater or a pair of jeans. Great inspirational pictures in this and lots of helpful patterns and designs.
Okay. Having Faith in a College's Journey to Motherhood by Sandra Steinberger. Some of you may have read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. I've read it as well, and I find this to be much more fun to read. But it's the same idea that we have a writer with a PhD in ecology who's exploring what our environment is doing to our bodies. This one, she's written a couple different books. This one is about her having a child at the age of 38 and trying to navigate how to do that in a healthy way, in a realistic way that doesn't just look at the popular pregnancy guidebooks that are out there that are not very honest and expect the mother to be the only gatekeeper for these toxins, when it is really the society that needs to figure out how to honor the fetus that's at the very top of the food chain.
Okay, I'm going to reverse my books. So this is my book called The South. It's a novel by Colm Tobin, who I've recently discovered and actually really fallen in love with. And it's unlike me to get excited about one writer and just start reading. And that's what happened, which has really been fun. This book is a story, he's an Irish writer, and this is a story of a woman, Catherine Proctor, who leaves her husband and son, who's about 5 or 3 years old, and goes off to Barcelona. She just can't be in, she's in the south of Ireland, she just can't be there anymore. She finds it self-defined. And then she has a whole life in Barcelona and falls in love and has a child and whatnot, and eventually journeys back home to Ireland and actually becomes in relationship with her son, who's now 30 years old. The reason it's such a beautiful book is because it's very much rooted in the landscape. When it's called the South, in terms of Irish, that means, there's the South and the North. And of course, in her mind, Catherine, she's going to the South into Barcelona, and then she returns home and reclaims her home. This one I love. This is called The Testament of Mary. And I read a review of it in the fall, and I thought, ooh, I want that book. And so I bought it for myself. And then my father gave it to me for Christmas, so I had 2 copies. And this is also by Colm Tobin, and it's a novella where he's imagining Mary, the mother of Jesus, as about 60 years old, living in a little house in Ephesus with what she calls her minders, people who had been apostles, who are keeping her and trying to glean from her information so that they can create their stories about Jesus and their subsequent Gospels. She thinks this is absolutely ridiculous. And as she goes through this experience, she relives the passion of Jesus and tells it from her perspective. And it's a very beautiful book. It's the kind of book that when you read it, when I read it, I would stop and say, oh, I have to read that paragraph again. It's right now in New York as a play with the Irish actress Fiona Shaw, and I'm going to go in a couple weeks. So.
Nice.
My last book is Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. And so this book's about Lyndgaard Trout, who finds himself in a sort of typical Midwest town that's basically everything that's wrong with America you can find there. They've got, pollution, and ugly concrete buildings, and mad car dealers, and so it's typical of Vonnegut in that it sort of breaks down the traditional boundaries of narrator and story. And there's also pictures, which are fun, and it's kind of written in a way of looking at America from an outsider's point of view that you don't normally get being American. And it's kind of tragic, but it's also funny and very interesting. It makes you think a lot. And very good.
This is The Color of Purple by Alice Walker. I like this book a lot. It's written, one thing I really like about this book is that it's written in letters. So each chapter, the main character is writing a letter to her sister, and then the next chapter would be her sister writing a letter back to her. So you can tell I like books that play with structure a lot. So I think that was really interesting to like about this book. One of the most profound things about this book, and I think they didn't do justice to it in the film, is the struggle of female sexuality that this book embodies, because I think that's actually the main and most important theme. Most people don't really realize that. Celie, the main character, I think she is put in a position where she's under slavery, but she's also a woman, so she's under 2 forms of oppression. And her husband, who she doesn't even have the choice to choose who to marry, she develops a relationship with him where she sees males become the embodiment of this oppression, of this hate, this evilness in the world, And so I really believe her sexuality, because she becomes a lesbian later on. She finds out she has lesbian sex actually in the book. And I think the reason why she moves towards lesbianism is because she can't find sexual satisfaction and attraction in the male anymore because of what the male has become and embodies to her.
I'm going to reverse the order of the next two, partly because one leads to another. We're here because we like books, and when you think of a book, the contents, but what about the book as a material object and the structure, and how can you take and make books in different forms that maybe complement the written part, the visual part. And so this book, called The Book as Art, Artist Books from the National Museum of Women in the Arts, based on a show at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, provides us with examples of different book artists who have taken the book structure and created different forms in expression of poetry, literature, their prose, or as visual books. It's a wonderful, very sophisticated treatment of themes that books help bring out in different ways. Which leads me to my last one, which is, first a book cataloger's nightmare. Thank you, Sharon. Chris Ware's, is it an artist book? Is it a graphic novel? Is it a box? And so it's Chris Ware's Building Stories. So you open this box, and inside you have, what is it, Sharon? 14? 14. Including, so think of building stories as a building with stories. Each story has a family or a person whose stories you get to know. So the stories of each story of the building, and the building and the stories build together to a sense of these people. So you get different book structures. This, accordion pleat. You get, 1 second. She gets 14 minutes. And so it goes. All 14 is bound. So, thank you, Sharon, for tackling this.
Okay, Tom Wessel's Reading the Forested Landscape. So this is another local author. Tom Wessels teaches at Antioch, New England. And this is a natural history of New England. And what he basically does is each chapter goes through and looks at a different forest type. And there's drawings that illustrate what he's talking about. But when he says reading the forested landscape, he's referring to the ability to go to a piece of woods and analyze what the history of it is, when it was last logged, what other kinds of disturbances there may have been, and what he can tell about the local climate based on what he's seen. So it's a really fascinating book, and it's helped me a lot in understanding the region here, which is a little different than places I've lived before. So it was a great introduction to Vermont for me.
All right, this is Don Winslow's The Power of the Dog. This is the best-known work of the guy who got me on the massive crime fiction kick. And the best way I can think of summarizing is to say that a CIA agent, a prostitute, an ex-boxing promoter, and a priest walk in the drug war. Their lives become increasingly miserable over the course of several decades. Winslow spent several years researching this, and it includes pretty much every perspective possible on this truly gigantic mess that's been going on for decades in a ham-handed and ultimately ill-fated attempt to treat. drug transportation like World War II. It does not end well, but it's exceptionally well written. What a cheerful note to end on.